I'm really excited to be coming back to teacher ed. Just to give you a little bit about my background, I was a teacher and a teacher educator for many years, and then I decided to become a researcher and a program developer. And when I was at the Garrison Institute, my colleague Richard Brown and Krista Turksman and I developed the Care for Teachers program that we've been doing. It's a mindfulness-based program for teachers. And now the University of Virginia is hiring me because they want me to bring this information into the teacher preparation program there at the Curry School. So it's really exciting. I'd also like to invite you to join me in thanking the Garrison Institute and the other members of the Leadership Council of the Initiative on Contemplative Teaching and Learning, and for making this possible. Also, I'd like to thank the generous contributions of the 1440 Foundation and the Lost Stand Foundation who've made this possible. I'd also like to thank all the people who've brought us to this space, and I'd like to invite you to join me in a gratitude experience and think about the people in your life who've played an important role in shaping your interest in this area. They could be mentors, teachers, they could be historical figures. They may have served as role models, but they also may have provided some kind of support to you in the form of financial, emotional, social, spiritual, inspirational. So let's just take a moment and close your eyes or just bring your gaze downward and think in your mind about all the people in your life, past, present, and future, who've brought you here. And we can also imagine that each one of us has a myriad of people. So there's a lot of people behind what we're doing here today. And as you bring them to mind, just gently thank them from your heart for providing you support. We wouldn't be here today without these people, and I really believe it's important to acknowledge them. So here's an overview of what I'm going to talk about. My intention today is to give you a very rough outline because I believe it's our job to fill it in. So I'm giving you sort of the broad strokes with the idea that at this conference we'll fill things in. So first I want to address school reform in a kind of general way and why it's really critical to prepare children to face the challenges that we're facing as human beings. Next, I'll explain why I believe that contemplative science can provide the tools that we need to improve our educational system. Then next, I'll explain the steps that we can take, first by applying contemplative approach to re-envisioning the school and classroom management and teacher education. And finally, how we might use it to reform curriculum and instruction, which I think is really a place that we haven't touched on very much yet. Finally, I'm going to lead us in a community intention setting exercise that I hope will serve as a compass for this event. So we all are well aware that our educational system is in a crisis today. Our schools were designed to educate and prepare children for the Industrial Revolution, and that age is long past. The information age is already waning, and we don't even really know what the next stage is going to be called. But we do know that it involves an integrated globalization and is changing very, very rapidly. So it's becoming crystal clear that our educational system needs a major upgrade. Our kids know that what they're learning is not very relevant to their success in the future. Many of them are bored, frustrated, and unhappy, and most of us also know that so are their teachers. We're doing a large project right now in New York City, in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan with probably about 250 teachers altogether. And we're learning a lot about what life is like in these areas, in these schools, and it's really frustrating. At the same time, we're facing unprecedented challenges that threaten our survival as a species. And this threat is barely acknowledged by our society. It's something that we haven't really taken to task. And our children really need to be prepared to adapt to these threats. This is a chart that shows a dramatic reduction in the polar ice and projections into the remainder of this century. So you can see the black line is satellite data, and the rest of those are different models, computer models that are projections. This chart shows observations and projections of rising levels of the oceans. And together, these visualizations demonstrate why we must change the way we educate our children, because collectively, this is the challenge that we face. So, how do we prepare our children for the future? It's really hard to think about this sometimes because the world is changing so rapidly, it's really hard to even imagine what the world's going to be like in 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. But one thing we know for sure, they need to be adaptable, creative, resilient, courageous, innovative, persistent, open-minded, open-hearted, and cooperative. They need to learn how to think outside the box. Because, as Einstein wisely noted, we cannot solve the problems with the same mentality with which they were created. So what does contemplative science have to offer? Well, here's another interesting chart. Since the turn of the century, in 2000, this amazing revolution has been occurring. The discoveries of neuroplasticity applied to the study of contemplative practices that are drawn from the world's wisdom traditions has quickly developed an evidence base that contemplative practice promotes a myriad of positive outcomes. One finding has become very clear is that practicing mindfulness promotes emotional and cognitive self-regulation. It helps us observe and override our automatic tendencies, and over time it can improve the way our brain functions. This skill is of critical importance to managing the challenges we face with a sense of calm determination. It can also promote the creativity and ingenuity that's required to address the problems we face. This is the tree that was published on the Contemplative Mind and Society website. It's the tree of contemplative practices. It may be hard to see from there, but it basically shows that there's a vast array of different contemplative practices that we can draw upon. And when we think about the broader realm of contemplation, I really appreciate the definition that my friend and colleague David Germano, who's over here visiting us, he's the director of the new Contemplative Sciences Center. David, you want to just wave your hand so everybody knows you're there? At University of Virginia. That center is one of the reasons why I'm going to UVA. It's very exciting. In a recent talk, he defined contemplation as the art and science of exploring our vast malleability in body, mind, and emotions between womb and tomb, our capacity for transformation. He also noted that contemplative practices can allow us to transform ourselves to better align with our values. And he said, this deeply human process, if taught and learned, is driven by the power of self-awareness and can lead us to greater personal and collective well-being, intellectual achievement, creativity, innovation, efficiency, caring, and social and relational skills. With a contemplative approach, I argue that we can shift the focus of education from generating, absorbing, and regurgitating information to cultivating understanding. As Malcolm Gladwell said in his book, Blink, we live in a world saturated with information. We have virtually unlimited amounts of data at our fingertips at all times. And we're well versed in the arguments about the dangers of not knowing enough and not doing our homework. But what I have sensed is an enormous frustration with the unexpected costs of knowing too much, of being inundated with information. We have come to confuse information with understanding. As Einstein said, any fool can know, the point is to understand. As you can tell, I really like Einstein. A contemplative approach can shift the focus of education from the accumulation of knowledge to the cultivation of understanding, wisdom, meaningfulness, and sense of shared humanity. As we face a common threat of extinction, we can find deeper ways to connect with one another. We can generate a deep sense of care and compassion for our fellow human beings around the globe. We have all the tools at our disposal to change the way we live in sustainable and morally and ethically just ways. Contemplation can help us cultivate the collective will, which is the thing I think is most missing in our world today. As we recognize our interdependence, we can see that we have no choice but to rise above our petty focus on individual wants and needs. So how do we accomplish this? Yes, that's the big question. I believe that we can generate a paradigm shift. I think it's already happening. I think we're on the cusp of a huge wave of change. We can change the way we prepare our teachers, for one thing, and those of us who are here are probably already doing that. We can re-envision school, and we can develop ways to infuse contemplative approaches to promote deeper learning and understanding. I believe that one of the first places that we can focus our attention is applying a contemplative approach to classroom management. I think today, first of all, I think a lot of teachers don't get any training in classroom management, but I also think that they've been taught to think that they are supposed to control the children in their classroom, because the word management implies that they're controlling something. But I think when they realize that they're not in control, because none of us can really control one another, it creates a lot of stress. So I think the contemplative approach to teacher preparation, and as well as integrating it into the ways that we develop community in our classrooms, can make a big change. Today's classrooms are a virtual hothouse of emotional reactivity. Teachers and students feel threatened by many, many things. And when they're feeling threatened, it's very hard to teach and it's very hard to learn. So it's clear that today teaching requires very high degrees of self-awareness and self-regulation, which teachers are not really taught much of. They're mostly focused on curriculum. As teachers learn to manage themselves, they can build socially and emotionally supportive learning environments for their students. Next, we can re-envision school altogether. When teachers and students are self-regulated, the school can evolve into a more flexible and adaptable space that can offer a broader range of learning activities that are more integrated and responsive to individual learning needs, and better serve the larger educational needs of the community. I think often the issues that we're having with self-regulation derail our abilities to be creative in our learning environments. Finally, we can apply contemplative science to curriculum and instruction by developing teaching methods and pedagogy that integrate contemplation. The Center for Contemplative Mind and Society has already done this in higher education, so they can provide for us really interesting models of how this could be done. So I am incredibly optimistic that we can really accomplish this, because if you look at what's been accomplished since the year 2000, and I can unpack this for you a little bit. Back in, I'm not sure if this works. Oops. No, okay. So way back in the year 2000, or maybe it was 2001, there was a meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and our friend and colleague Mark Greenberg, who's also on our leadership council, was at that meeting, and several other people. And it was focused on destructive emotions and how contemplative approaches might be useful in helping to reduce destructive emotions. Out of that came a whole host of different activities. Right after that, Linda Lantieri wrote that book, Spirited Schools. 9/11 happened, and the work that Linda's been doing in New York City since then. The Cultivating Emotional Balance project was initiated in San Francisco, which I ended up working on, which was an integration of contemplative science and emotion skills. The study was actually conducted with teachers, and I ended up working on that study, and it is actually, it has from Cultivating Emotional Balance, there are two offshoots that have come out of that program. One is the CARE program, the other one is the SMART program. Mark Wilding over here right now manages that program in Colorado. So those are two programs that sort of evolved out of that. But you can see there's been many, many other meetings. The Garrison Institute in 2005, initiated the initiative here, but in 2005 published the first mapping study of contemplation and education. And at that time, there really wasn't very much going on at all. It was really the very, very beginning. And now, even just barely 10 years, not even 10 years later, there's many, many more people doing this work. But you can see Mind and Life Education Research Network gathered and published a couple of papers. Anyway, you can see so many different things have evolved. Richie Davidson Center for Investigating Healthy Minds, Trish Broderick's Learning to Breathe, the Mindful Child, lots and lots of different things have gone on since then to support this work. So we've done a lot in a very short period of time. And I believe that this work that we've already done up until this point has already started to make a valuable contribution to school reform. To conclude the talk, I invite you to join me in a community intention setting practice. So I invite you to either close your eyes or gently lower your gaze. The first I'd like to invite you to envision a future world for our children. A world that is safe, just, happy, peaceful, and sustainable. Next, let's think about the steps we can take individually and collectively to move our educational system to align with this vision. Now, as a community, let's set our intention to work towards this vision in whatever ways we can. And let's spend this time together articulating this vision and the pathways to realize it. I would like to leave you with a quote from Einstein that I believe embodies the contemplative approach to re-envisioning our world. This is from a letter that Einstein wrote to a rabbi who was grieving over the loss of his son, and he asked him for comfort. And this is what he said: "A human being is part of a whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Nobody is able to achieve this completely, but the striving for such an achievement in itself is part of liberation and the foundation for inner security." Thank you.